Alright, let's talk about Anji coming into Season 2 of Strive. It's no secret that Anji is widely considered one of the worst characters in Strive, tied with Faust typically. From his lackluster frame data, short range, and Fujin just being a bad button, there are many difficulties Anji players must overcome in order to win consistently. And while Strive's balance allows players to fend for themselves in the tower, which, as a side note, for a first year of fighting game, the balance is actually quite good. This character is in desperate need for some love in order to truly be competitive with the rest of the cast. Now, I've heard some outrageous statements regarding Anji, and while I could dive into the aspect of the discourse, I will attempt to avoid it. Outside of this naming changes I would like to see in Strive, I would like to also briefly talk about why I believe ArcSys designed Anji the way he is because of one specific tool: spin. In its previous iteration of this character, Anji possessed multiple command normals, many of them having guard points on specific frames. This created a main RPS situation for Anji's players to thrive, to pick apart their opponent's neutral game or offense. This also created a very obnoxious and ignorant game plan that was insufferable to play against for some players. So coming into Strive, where you want the characters to feel fairer in this environment and simpler game plans for players to execute at a floor level, they decided to condense Anji's guard point into one special move. Not only that, but in my theory, he is still heavily designed and balanced around the existence of Guardpoint, where many of his flaws are manifested. Anji's problems can be boiled down into several different things. His frame data overall, considering his range, is too slow and has too much recovery. He has an issue with converting his normals into real damage outside of counter hits. His offense is largely strike throw, which is typically fine, but lacks access to a consistent knockdown outside of counter hits. His defense sucks. No reward for mashing out, mediocre air options, and while his reversal is quite useful against like projectile Oki, it also has a flaw of it being grabbable, which for the most part, once again, is fine. My theory is that most if not all of these issues are attempts to balance around his guard point. Let me explain my perspective. I'll quickly talk about how I view Anji's neutral game. Number one, quick light pokes that will offer no or little return. The goal is to check people in neutral and pressure them with the strong range the light pokes actually have, because the range on light pokes is quite good. Two, the slash button that had no conversion ability on launch, but only on counter hit. They're slow in nature and have bad recovery on far slash. His old far slash actually beats 6Ps. This is very important to know. Still little one. Number three, counter pokes and advancing buttons. So his 2D, his 5H being typical counter pokes, his 6H and Fujin being the advancing buttons. Specific in usage and offer high reward on counter hit and alright to decent reward on regular hit, with varying amount of risk given the frame data. Layer 2. As stated earlier, Anji has frame data issues coupled with its range. Normally this is a bad design for fighting game characters, as if you have bad range, usually you have frame data that would support it. Or you are designed around another tool in your arsenal. In his case, it's spin. From my perspective, spin is a strong RPS tool that serves as a counter poke to counter pokes. Additionally, if you successfully spin, 9 out of 10 times it offers you conversion of sorts. Think about the distance spin covers on screen and think about Anji's normals. Regular spin, if you don't hold down the button or you get off Fujin or Ko, it covers the same distance of far slash, but then it doubles the distance of far slash if you hold the button. It's actually just a really long counter poke to counter pokes. Let's think about his game plan. Harass people with light pokes, stop 6P attempts, and crush counter pokes with spin to reap the rewards. This can also explain why his old far slash beat 6Ps, because they want their opponent to commit to a different option, maybe a longer range button. That way, Anji's spin will have more value. Additionally, this might be why Anji's 6P isn't designed as a counter poke on the ground. They want players to rely on spin as their answer for longer range normals. Now, obviously, this is just a theory, and this is also a lens in how I personally see Anji's neutral game. Regardless, let's talk about Season 2 wishes. For this portion of the video, I'll separate it into two aspects: what I believe are fair changes, what I believe are maybe not so fair changes, but let it rock. So, fair changes. You can no longer PRC spin. This has to go from my perspective. Anji as a character is designed around his guard point and should be rewarded if successful, not brought into a weird RPS situation afterwards where a lot of times the risk versus reward is more on his opponent's side. However, I fear ArcSys won't remove this, as it might be removing counterplay from their perspective. That being said, I think this hampers Anji way too much and what his strongest tool is. So this really just shouldn't belong in the first place. The return of 3P. 3P is an overhead from Guilty Gear XX. Really good one at that. 20 frame startup. 0 on block. Doesn't have to remain 0 on block. I really don't care. It can be -2 because I think that's pretty normal for a lot of command overheads in Strive, to be honest. Anji can also use tap dust for offense, but looping back in Shitsu is not as consistent as I like it to be. It's really range dependent. Not only that, but the range is very low on it, so once again, it's really hard to do consistently, even with like a decent amount of practice. This would greatly boost his offense if you give him back 3p off the butterfly, as long as the recovery is low. I would also like a butterfly, just as a side bit, was 2 hitting again on its way back down, just like it was in the previous iteration of Anji. Hell, you could make it so it's not special cancelable in Strive. I really don't care. I just think the tool should exist. It's not special cancelable in the previous games though. Frame data on normals. As a quick note, I've seen some crazy suggestions regarding frame data for Anji. You might see some of that in the unfair changes though. That being said, when it comes to some of these suggestions, please stop. He does not need his 2H to combo off close slash. That would be absolutely ridiculous. Anji's legs are not the problem though. Honestly, I think they're very good. 2P and 5P have massive range for punch buttons, just very little to basically no reward. 5K and 5P have 5 frames active, making them very good checks in neutral. Once again, the reward is just not really existent. His slashes and maybe his 5H could use some love. From my perspective, far slash needs 1 or 2 more active frames. I'd also personally like if 2S was 1 frame faster, given the distant drop off between the 2 buttons. You could also reverse the suggestion instead and make his far slash a little bit faster and then make 2S a little bit more active to make it very similar to Soul's 2S. But I don't know if that's necessarily the right approach, to be quite honest. I would also like if 5H was 13 frames. This way you no longer deal with this idea of like worrying about reversal because of this natural gap, and you can just create a gap yourself if you want to try cancel on mashing. That, or you could increase the tackle level of his slash buttons from tackle level 2 to tackle level 3. This will allow Anji to actually have enough blocks done on his slash buttons. That being said, you would also increase risk gain if you did that, so I don't know if you really want to do that in a game where damage is raised so high. I also like if 5H was slightly more disjointed, so it served as a stronger counter poke. Now let's move on to Nagia. I have 2 suggestions here. A better knockdown. For the love of God, I really want Oki. There are 2 ways to go about this. Allow Anji players to run up close slash, or give them Shitsu Oki. When I was thinking about this, I initially was thinking, given the context of Strive, Shitsu Oki off a BNB would possibly be too strong. And then I realized that so many characters have such easy Oki options that's like, and given Anji's archetype, I feel, and this is a really important to mention, this is more of a feeling, that it would be a deserved given Anji wants to do. I want people to respect Anji's options and actually care about getting hit by Nagia, because I believe a lot of characters or a lot of players, unless you have meter to PRC to really cash out on damage, they just don't care if they get hit by Nagia. They're like, well, whatever, I'm back in neutral. Make Nagia safer is my other aspect to this. There's 2 ways to go about this. You can slightly reduce the hurt box, or you can make it -5. -5 would be way better for Anji, but I think this is a really unhealthy change. I have really simple reasoning for this. If you make it -5, punches to Nagia will be very weak and unrewarding. This will also promote a I'm gonna just do it mentality, and people just wouldn't really care about risking anything up close, right? Because they're going to just do Fuji Nagia. This will also create RPS options when Nagia is spaced out. Anji players could challenge easier, like with 5P, 5K, 2D, whatever, with spin as well, because their opponent will have to come forward. -5, while negative, isn't necessarily the end of your turn. Just ask a May or a Go Lewis player about that. Now on to the unfair changes. So unfair changes are targeting Fujin across the board. Now I would like to see Fujin be targeted in general. I really hope they do touch the button, because the button needs help. My changes to Fujin in my head are possibly unfair. You want to see a trend too. Ren, 21 frames startup. Currently right now it's 25 frames. I do not care if Ren stays at -15. That's fine, that's okay. It's too easy for strong players to respond to. The reward mid-screen isn't even that strong if once you compare it to a character like, let's say, Leo Whitefang, who can loop their win con over and over again if they land their overhead. And not only that, the overhead is +5 on block when you do a stance cancel. The main issue with this change would be smoking someone in the corner, given the fact that you can actually get pretty good damage off Ren in the corner, which is kind of why it's in the unfair section, but you know, let it rock. Total recovery is currently 28 frames, reduce it to 24 frames. Once again, too easy to respond to. Shin also reduces frames. To be honest, you might notice a trend. I'm doing -4, it'll be 26 frames now. Car Fujin. This is where it all comes together. First off, if you're Anji player and you frequently use Car Fujin stuff in neutral, stop it. Get some help. It's not very good. It's pretty bad, to be frank. There are much better ways to approach neutral from my perspective. Secondly, it needs to be faster. Currently, you can only do it on the 13th frame. If this tool is going to remain in Strive for its entirety, needs to be stronger. Only being able to do this on 13th frame is too much of a gimmick. So my suggestion, make it cancelable on the 6th frame. Why the 6th frame? Given the previous bus, how we reduced everything by 4 frames, actually make it car Fujin on the 6th frame, we actually making all the previous buttons, if you were to car it from their normals, slower than its original state, but much better than it is on live. Also, when you look at a lot of tools on live that are technically quote unquote reactable, but really they're more or less tools that people quote unquote get away with, talking about like stuff like Fold Arc, you're talking about like the spiral arrow ability. These are typically just tools people use in neutral or specifically on offense when they are just kind of sprinkling them in. And they're usually around 27 to 29 frames, right? This would bring a lot of the tools I just mentioned in line with that. A car rim would be 27 frames, hop would be 30 frames, shin would be 32 frames. I think this is quite fair in quotations, but I put it unfair because I can understand how like this might be kind of ridiculous to just block a 2S into a run randomly. Oh, and Fujin, you could make it -10. That would be nice. This would allow people to technically punish Fujin with their 10 frame button if they have the goal to press it right away. More focus on the fact that Anji could repeat his pressure more often, and that would be really nice for the character. Any lower and I'd be 100% capping, or maybe I've been capping this entire video. Finally, I haven't mentioned anything to improve his conversion ability on this list, and to be frank, I've done that on purpose. Most of these changes are aimed at his offense. I want Anji to be a stronger offensive powerhouse, and I truly believe that's where he needs to go. His neutral is great from my perspective, and on a personal note, I think high conversion ability is a problem in Strive. If you think about strong characters like Happy Chaos and Nagaryuki who can convert out everything and lead into high amount of damage or wall break from mid-screen or what have you, it's a problem. I don't necessarily think characters need to have high conversion ability. I think conversion ability needs to be reviewed and looked at, and people need to think maybe you shouldn't have characters with such high conversion ability, and if they do have high conversion ability, maybe their Oki or damage should be weaker, but maybe that wouldn't be very fun. But whatever, this is the unfair section. Give him like 3 of his old plus R normals so he can convert off everything. Let 6S convert off 2P into a hard knockdown Nagia into gets for game. Why not? That would be truly unfair from my perspective in a game like Strive. Make him a plus R character. No one will have fun. Either way, that's how I currently feel about Anji. What do you think? Like, comment, subscribe, check out my Twitch, all that good stuff, and we'll see you again later. This has been Bit Ahead. Peace.